We've now solidly turned the corner in the season, and I hope everyone is enjoying the cold weather. And I just want to encourage you that when we're in the transition of the seasons, it's a really big invitation to pay attention. We can think about our being as many different layers. In a way, we can think about them as different bodies. Like we have a physical body, we have an emotional body, we have a spiritual body, we have all this kind of layers. And we have a sensory body. So I would say in some ways, that's one of the, maybe the body that we're most familiar with. We think we're most familiar maybe with our physical body, but actually most of what's happening with us physically, it doesn't show up in our experience. It shows up underneath our experience, but in the sensory realm, the eyes, the ears, nose, tongue, body, and traditionally within Buddhism, we also say the mind or the heart. In that sensory realm, there's things happening all the time. And when the seasons are changing, in the sensory realm, there's a shift. And that shift is an invitation to pay attention. And what's so beautiful about these different layers is they're completely interpenetrate with each other. So your spiritual body, your emotional body, your physical body, all of these things are part of, or we could say they're another facet of your being from the sensory being. So the way that the air, the feel of the air, that smell of the kind of crisping of the leaves, I don't know if that's how it smells to me, and that little bit fresh, and then the sun comes out and you can, just a different quality when it rains, the smell of the earth that comes forward, and a certain kind of quietness that starts to settle in. Just pay attention to that. And as you pay attention, I don't mean just you pay attention to it. I mean that when you open those sense gates, without trying to grab onto it too much, you feel the reflection that comes down through your own being, and you know something in a different way. There's an intimacy that you have with your body on all these different layers, different types of bodies. And that's one of the great gifts of a spiritual life, I would say particularly a meditative life, where you're coming back to pay attention in a very straightforward, open way, is quite a joy. And we live in such a robust living environment, which maybe is true everywhere, but I feel like here in the Willamette Valley we have this unbelievably excellent opportunities to tap into that every day. So, okay, that's my pom-pom talk for this morning. Please enjoy the season in the way that you can. And then this morning we have time for question and response. And at the beginning of these times, I always like to remind people that this is the lifeblood of our tradition. Questions, and we'll just say questions. There's always a response when a question is really becomes a really true question, whether you're asking it of a teacher or you're asking it of a friend or your beloved or the earth. When your question becomes true, there is a response. And so in this particular format, the response comes from a teacher, and that has been maintained in our tradition, that we cultivate questions rather than just kind of taking what's presented and thinking we're supposed to just think about it in a certain way or believe it in a certain way, that we're part of a dynamic process of a living body of the Buddha. Okay, so the awakened body we can think of as a body that is alive, and it's alive through our life. And as we question and explore, that body stays alive. When we don't, it just becomes a wooden block, which is pretty nice. That's a pretty nice wooden block. But it's actually alive because of the practice that we do. So I just say that, and really anything is okay for a question, to being like, what's that funny thing you wear? Or this was a teaching and I didn't quite understand this part, or I'm really working with this thing. Really anything, let me be the judge of what shouldn't be on the table. And if it isn't supposed to be on the table, I'll say, let's talk about that privately. Yeah.
Ojo-san?
Uh-huh.
I woke up this morning with the words Ambrosia Gate in my mind, and I had a dream. I don't remember the details of the dream, but just it's really alive. And I'm wondering if you can talk about the meaning of the Ambrosia Gate. It's, of course, part of what we chant in the evening service, and we offer homage to the ancestors, and we vow to awaken, and what more?
I promise she's not a plant. Well, kind of. Not a premeditated plant. But this is the first day of October, so during October, we take special interest in the chanting of Ambrosia Gate as we prepare for the ceremony that's called Segaki, or the Festival of the Hungry Ghosts, or the offerings to the hungry ghosts, which happens the Sunday that's the closest to Halloween. I believe it's something like the
29.
Yeah, 29th. Halloween's on a Tuesday, I think, and so it would be right before there. And so that text, the Ambrosia Gate, is has 3 sections. And you're right, we chant it every day for evening service, and then it's also the text for the Segaki ceremony. But then we do a special version of the ritual each weekday during the month of October in preparation for the Festival of the Hungry Ghosts. And that text is broken into 3 parts. The first part is homage. So homage to the Buddha, homage to the Dharma, homage to the Sangha, homage to Avalokiteshvara, homage to Shakyamuni Buddha, homage to Ananda, who shows up in the stories about the hungry ghost, the origin of those ceremonies. And then there's a text that was written by a monk named Menzan, who some of us are studying a text of his on Thursday nights this fall. Anyone's welcome to come if you like to. But he was trying to put together what is the core of this practice that we're doing in feeding hungry ghosts. Okay? And I'll talk about that in a second. And then the last part is a string of dharanis. And dharanis are incantations, kind of like a mantra. They're incantations which have a spiritual significance. And so the series of incantations that are there are all about what it is to feed a hungry ghost and for them to achieve Buddhahood. That series of mantras is enacting that each time we chant it. So if we come to that middle part of the text, which is in English, if any of this kind of like seems kind of resonant for you, on our website there's like the sutra book. You can go look at the sutra book and you can read the text if you want. I don't know why I'm laughing about that. I highly encourage you to do that. But that middle part of the text is about 4 or 5 paragraphs long, and basically what happens in that is Menzan explains that we ask all kinds of spirits, all kinds of beings, of every kind of being, but particularly spirits that are lost and they're hungry. And we ask them to come together, and then we make offerings to them. And in making offerings to them, we encourage them to take those offerings, to prepare food, and to offer it back to the world, both for them to receive it as nourishment, but also for them to make an offering to the world. And because of that merit, they will take up the path of awakening. And then we say, when you've become awakened, please teach us, please guide us. I think this is one of the most radical things, that we start out with the spirits that are lost and hungry and they don't know what to do. And that doesn't mean we know what to do, but we do know that offerings bring out Buddhas. So we make an offering to them and we teach them what we know, which is offering is full of merit. To make an offering, to give a gift, to be generous. We don't always know where it's going to go, but we know that something fundamentally shifts through that. We can't plan it out. And then we know that these beings, when they take up that practice, they will be wise, and we'll need their help. Right? But think about this in your own life. All the things which you extricate from yourself because they're lost, they're confusing, they're dangerous, they're whatever. And here we have a practice that says, no, don't cut them off. Don't dismiss them, but actually ask them to gather together. And through the practice of generosity, you'll find that all of those places that are stuck, painful, difficult, confusing, that they also have something to teach you. Yeah. But they have to be transformed. And that's what that ritual work is about. And the ritual work itself is just very directly true and important and powerful. And it also aligns our life in a way so that outside of the ritual, we're doing that same practice, you know. So that's a long response. But if I was going to make it very short, I would say during October, be kind and be generous, and take up generosity as an intentional act. It will teach you directly. Like, there's just no way to go wrong. Like when you're generous and you haven't fully perfected the generosity, you're like, oh, here's a gift, Susan, and you're waiting for she's gonna love it so much, she's gonna thank me, and I'm gonna be a great person because I gave her a gift. It won't work quite right, and you'll feel it. Great. No problem. Now you've received a teaching, right? And you can say, oh, what's the nature of generosity? Where did I miss that a little bit? And then you have another chance for practice. So October, from here all the way up to passing out, teeth rotting, children on the 31st, please do it with vigor. I have nothing against teeth rotting.
I apologize, this might be a little abstract. If you could speak a little louder, speak a little to the issue between karma, which I don't feel particularly in charge of.
Yeah.
I don't think we are actually. And how we make our decisions in this life. And is there any way we can have an orientation that influences that karma? Yeah.
So I think it might have been you who told me this once about parenthood. It's like a ultimate responsibility with very little control. Yeah, and that's actually our life, right? That we don't have to have kids to experience that. It's like we kind of walk around thinking we're in charge of our life or in control of it. And I would say that that's not exactly true. But the teaching of karma asks us to first see that, like, oh yeah, there's all kinds of patterns moving through the world, and what I call myself is a collection of those patterns. And to recognize that it's not just I'm deciding to do things in this way that's beyond causes and conditions, but I'm embedded in causes and conditions, and some of those causes and conditions are my own patterns, my own karma. So that's a little bit, at first can feel disempowering or something. Like, well, what do you mean? I'm not in control? I'm not making up my own mind? And it's like, no, it doesn't mean that. It means you just have to admit that you can't just decide how things will be and they will be that way. And the easiest way to learn that is to sit down and look at a wall for like about 30 to 40 minutes. And at the end of that period, ask yourself, am I in control? And your answer will always be no. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be totally out of control, but it means that you know that there's things moving through you which aren't just your decision. So that's the starting point for practice. Or that, I would say, that's the continual renewal of practice, that we say, okay, so now, how am I going to live? I have to pay attention to these patterns that move through as me, and then what do I do with them? And the Buddha Shakyamuni was very clear in this, in his teachings, his kind of earthly teachings, that we have a part to play in the unfolding of that karma. That our intention is what karma is about. The causes and effects of karma are based in intention. It doesn't mean I just get to decide all the time. I'll have massive things moving through me. What do I do with that? How do I pay attention to it? And how do I navigate with those things that are moving through? Sometimes I think about it as being on a river. Like when I was a kid, growing up in Oregon was great because you get an inner tube. Cars used to have these things called inner tubes. They're made out of rubber. And you could go to the tire store, and the old ones, after they've been patched a couple times, they give them to you, or maybe you could buy them for 50 cents or something like that, and you patch them up and you blow them up, and then you could float down a river. It was really fun. I grew up right by the Willamette River in Salem. So we'd do that, and we had some creeks and stuff that we would float. But when you're floating down the river, you're both have to do something, and you're also not in control, right? And you're navigating. And this is how our life is. So when we can really get that in our heart, that's how it's going, then there's a big freedom. It's a freedom to respond to things with our deep intention for awakening and for wisdom and for compassion and for a full human life. It doesn't mean that's always where it's going to go right away, but it means we have the freedom to do that because we're not thinking that everything should be controllable. And I find that to be a really sweet spot within our practice. And the reminder at first can feel a little crushing, like when we're sitting down, we're like, oh my God, it's a mess in here. And that it can feel that way, but it's a positive thing to have that experience, because it means, oh no, actually there's room for navigation. And each time I notice, I can do some adjusting. And maybe it's 100 times or 500 times before it really shifts. But Kyogen Carlson Roshi, the great teacher, founder at Dharma Rain Zen Center, co-founder there, and a big player in the founding of our temple here, Buddha Eye Temple. One thing I heard him say many times is he would say, habit energy, he oftentimes will call it, habit energy or karma. When you see it, its days are numbered. Might be big number. Might be a big number. But maybe not. But they are numbered, because now you have a room that you didn't have when you couldn't see it. When you couldn't see it, it was behind you, like directing you. And once you can see it, then you have something to work with. Yeah.
And I love the river analogy. I was just on a 4-day trip on the Road Rivers.
Yeah. Then you got to do that, right?
Exactly.
And the really good boat captains, they get that.
Oh, absolutely.
And that's why they can do it.
That's right.
Because they're like, we're on a river, it's alive. And it could swallow you.
Right.
And it eventually will. But in the meantime, yeah.
They always say, you always respect the river. You never take any of it for granted.
Yes. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think how we could apply that to our life.
Yeah, exactly.
Like really respect life.
Right.
Respect that life is rich and full, complicated, beautiful, difficult, tragic. All those things. Yes. Masked and all. Yeah.
First, I want to say that this is my favorite of all the things that we do here. This is my favorite Sunday, and clearly it must be everybody else's. This is the biggest group we've had for a long time. But that's not what I wanted to say. True confessions. Most of what we talk about, I haven't a clue. Okay, I mean, I just rolls over me, and I just really I can't. I could not explain it to anybody else, and so I assumed that I just actually really don't understand it so much. But in recent years, it's I'm caring less that I don't understand it.
Yeah.
So have I given up in a bad way, or have I given up in a good way?
I can't answer that for you, but I could talk about the dynamic a little bit.
Please.
And the dynamic, I would say, is the line that we're working with is, am I still in a process of exploration and questioning and discovering, or have I shut down to that whole process? Oftentimes, in terms of the study of Buddha Dharma, first there's like an absorption period where we just don't even know the names of things. Like people are talking about Dharma, and we're like, what's Dharma? I don't even know what Dharma is. And then someone says, oh, well, Dharma can mean a few different things, but usually it means a teaching. It's also sometimes what's called what the Buddha woke up to. The Buddha was enlightened, the Buddha was enlightened to Dharma. And so then the Buddha could teach the Dharma because the Buddha woke up to Dharma. Dharma also means each individual thing is a Dharma. So you hear something like that, and you're like, okay, I heard the explanation, and part of it makes sense to me, and then I start relating with the word. I build the lexicon, those kinds of things. So that's really important period. And then there might be certain texts that we're more interested in, or certain kinds of topics that make more sense to us and become more resonant for us, and that's great. We build that. But then there's this period of time where I think it's very important actually to just be like, I don't know. I hear the teachings, like some of them resonate with me and things become clear through them, but I can't say I get it. That's a very important point, and it can lead to many different things. But one way is it can lead to, I'll just give myself a story. And the story will be something like, well, I sit sometimes and I'm quiet and I do the best I can. And that's what humans can do. And then I just have created a little circle that I go around in. And that's not bad. It's a good circle, actually, doing the best you can and trying to be kind and all those kinds of things. But it is closed circuit. And the closed circuit shuts down the path. We're just there. Now, having said that, most of the closed circuits get crushed at some point. And so then we've got to go along anyway. So it's not like closed circuit's the end of the game. It's not like they're awful. It's just that it's a thing to stay attuned to. And then we can ask ourselves, well, what's the question? What is provocative to me? And then pay attention to the thing that's provocative. And then we're practicing in the way of an open system, where we can be receptive to different perspectives and ideas, and there's always something that we might, what's that? What's that? Yeah. This is a thing I would say was one of the most impressive things to me about my teacher, and that was, he passed away this spring. He was 97, and I hadn't seen him for a couple of years because of COVID and all those things. I just saw him right before COVID started, and he was always, he's like, I'm reading this thing. And he'd want to talk about it. And he was always engaged in that exploration. And for him, a lot of that was, he loved to read Buddhist teachings, particularly Dogen Zenji. And so a lot of it was wrapped up in that, but it wasn't only that. So I treasure that. I think it's important. And it doesn't mean for everyone it's a text. The text of life is rich or richer than anything anyone could write down. So.
Did you?
Hi.
When you talked about particularly addiction, we help each other. You say what you say in addiction. You can't say to your parents, and you learn. And you help other people, and said, I did that.
Yeah.
I'm this type of addict.
Yeah.
And
that's one of the most important kinds of generosity.
Yeah.
Like, it's easy for us to visualize generosity when it's like, I have a donut. Here, I'll give you this donut. Like that is easier to visualize. That's wonderful generosity. I don't mean to put that down at all, especially cherry pie. If you were wondering. Actually, someone brought me a piece of cherry pie. Was it you? Oh, thank you. That was so good.
I was wondering if you ate it, and I was going to
I opened the door and there was this little brown box from Sweet Life, and it had a piece of cherry pie in it. Anyway, I've been trying to lose weight, but cherry pie, delicious. Anyway, that kind of generosity is wonderful. Just it's very clear, and we can. Because it's material, we can kind of force ourselves to do it a little bit, and that's all really helpful. But the generosity of spirit that it takes to be present with other people who we know are suffering, like I'm suffering, and to be willing to share that suffering with other people, that is a kind of generosity that's like a whole nother level of profundity. And it's where a lot of healing can happen, and I know you've been deeply involved in that for 50 years now?
50 years.
Yeah. So that's amazing.
I have a question about the Bodhisattva Path.
Yes.
So the Bodhisattva vow that we chant that delusions are inexhaustible.
Mm-hmm.
I vow to end them.
Mm-hmm.
I'm working with someone in my life who is deeply deluded.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that we are not all deeply deluded,
Mm-hmm.
and it's very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
And I was hoping for some guidance.
Yeah, it's challenging. Yep. that's what it is. You know, maybe part of the question could be where do we find the strength, or what does it mean to be able to meet such a being and continue being there and not just getting hopeless or burnt out? Is that the direction?
I think I'm looking for sort of the centerboard, you know, and in the river analogy,
Mm-hmm.
So that when in my generosity of continually trying to meet her,
Mm-hmm.
You know, something that isn't gonna
Yeah.
pull me off center,
Yeah.
that I can return to,
Mm-hmm.
so that I know where that boundary is.
Yeah.
When you know it's so strong.
Yep. So this work about the integrity of our own path is absolutely necessary. The Bodhisattva vows do not say, as a Bodhisattva, I will jump into your whirlpool of delusion and do what you think I should do to join you in that whirlpool of delusion. Because I'm a Bodhisattva. That's not what it says. Now, great Bodhisattvas appear in all different kinds of worlds, in hell realms, human realms, animal realms, to be able to help beings. But when they show up, they don't play by the rules of that place. And that's what we have to learn about the integrity of our interaction with people. I was just working with someone this morning who I took them to the behavioral health care unit at the hospital, and I was hopeful that they would go in. I think they really need this. I don't know them super well, but fairly well. They've lost 30-40 pounds in like a few week period. They're in a bad, I know there's history of things, so I'm trying to get them to go in, and they're right at the last minute. This person's like, nope, I won't go. And tells the charge nurse, goes outside, and I went there, and right away, what usually happens in that situation, I haven't been in that situation tons of times, but enough times, that then it's like, okay, we're going to go for a walk, or we're going to do this, or we're going to do that. And at that point where you say, no, we're not. Actually, I have a life. I'm trying to help you. I told you what I think you need. I brought you here. I keep encouraging you to do this. I can't force you to do it. And I'm going to go now. Like, that's very helpful to someone, actually. But it doesn't feel like it when you're in the point of trying to help them. And so one thing that happens, especially as we draw closer to the Bodhisattva vows, it will tug on a big delusion we have, which is that we will be the savior. And a Bodhisattva and a savior is a different thing. And so we have to be really attentive to that kind of savior complex that we have, and then be willing to say no. To be the most help to this person means that I'm willing to go as far as I can go, but I'm also willing to say, part of what I have to do is say no. And there's a boundary there. So how do we find that? How do we find the courage? And when do we know is the right place? That's in the doing. And so right there, do you agree? I had to decide, well, do I get back to the temple? There's stuff going on, or can I extend, could I go for a walk? I have to decide right there in the moment, like, what am I going to do? And one of the things that I pay attention for is the person willing to share the ball? Are they willing to share the ball? Or have we just gotten to a place where they realize that they've got the ball, and whatever they do, I will respond to what they want? That's like jumping in the pool. And so if there's not a back and forth on the ball, that's a red flag that you're not going to probably be helpful. You're probably going to go through a long wild ride with them, and at the end go, oh, that wasn't helpful for anybody. So that's part of what I look for. Having said that, I've found times, I'm talking about a very specific kind of situation, but where, I've just cleared my calendar and spent 2 days with somebody because I felt like it was the right thing to do. And sometimes it's helpful, sometimes it's not. But you got to make a decision in a moment.
Kojo?
Hi.
Hi. I have a question. I've been thinking recently about the nature of light and dark.
Yeah.
And what I personally can sometimes perceive the conversation to kind of uphold light as all that's positive and warm and happy, and dark as what's scary and unknown and filled with anxiety. But the more I think about it, the more I feel like there can be a real comfort in the softness of darkness, and there can be a real, for me, anxiety about the harshness that light can provide, making all of those edges really sharp. So for those of us like me who feel fine turning towards the dark, what can you say about the difficulty in turning towards the light and all that it illuminates?
Yeah, thank you. Were you here for a talk a couple weeks ago, Turning to the Dark?
Yes.
Okay, great. So that's for people who, if you're interested in this question and you weren't here, there's a recording on the website you can listen to about this. And there's a fabulous book called In Praise of Shadows, which is by a Japanese author. He's a novelist, and it's really an aesthetics book, but if you read it with a kind of mind of this kind of question, you find that there's all these other teachings that are inside. It's a really thin book, pretty available. But what you say, I think, is exactly right, that we tend to think of light as the positive and dark as the negative, and one of the ways is that figuring things out, knowing how they are, then being illuminated, graspable, understood, that's all the qualities of light. And the qualities of darkness are ambiguity, etc. That makes a lot of people nervous, especially if the darkness makes a lot of people nervous, especially if your karma is to look for clarity through being able to define and control. And so I was referring to it in that talk as the headlamps. I always complain about those headlamps. I hate those headlamps that people wear when you're camping or whatever. Because you look around, you become completely unaware of what the light of where you're looking does to every other thing. Right? You're just like, and you're in a campground, and there's like just lights going through the trees everywhere, and then someone's like, oh hi, and they look at you and you're blinded. And so I always complain about because I don't like them. But what I found out in not liking him is actually we all have one of those on us all the time. We're doing that constantly. We are looking at things, defining, shining a light, and if we're kind of more extroverted type of person, we're just pushing that onto people all the time. Did you see that? Did you see this? This is like this. This is like that. I'm that kind of person. But that actually causes a lot of nervousness. That is much more anxiety producing than, say, dealing with the ambiguity of darkness. Again, being in a campground, walking to the bathroom. What if you just held a flashlight and turned it on when you needed it? How would that be different? How would you feel in that kind of situation? Actually, if you turn the light on and you walk around, what you find is very quickly you become afraid of what's beyond what's illuminated. And the darkness becomes an enemy because you're holding on to the things that can be defined because the light's shining on them. And you can feel the anxiety in yourself if you pay attention. It's like, oh, what's out there? What's at the end of the illumination? And so I really recommend that people, in a very physical way, play with that. And some people have certain kinds of karmas which make darkness difficult for them, and so you have to find out what's the right chemistry for you. But I say, like literally spending time in darkness and learning to appreciate it is really helpful. Being able to appreciate not seeing or seeing something which is the darkness itself. You're spending time in the dark there's different qualities to darkness, and different layers, and different ways that things are revealed in that space. And in a way, that's what meditation is doing for us too. I would say especially, we tend to come to meditation with tilted towards the light, and we think like, I'm going to concentrate. I'm going to whip my mind into shape. I'm going to like be really good and upright and clear. And while that has a kind of noble quality to it, it's also a little like a crusader, like red cross on the white. Take over Jerusalem, right? Which is your heart. And that's what you're trying to do, rather than saying, maybe Jerusalem is full of beings that don't need overpowered. And what's possible there, and it takes darkness to be able to do that. Hi.
I'm wondering if you could talk about the wooden calligraphy piece on the altar on the right side.
Sure. So right here, behind the flowers, this is was a piece I created for the ceremonies we had last week, and it's typical at a temple to have a shrine to the earth spirits, and we have not yet developed such a shrine, and that's common in many smaller temples. They don't literally have a shrine, but they'll have a placard that says earth spirits, and that's what that says in a kind of very old style Chinese, kind of like a cracks and bones style Chinese. That's where Chinese letters originally came from, is like oracles and roasting bones over a fire and looking at the cracks and stuff like that. So it's that very old style. So we honor the earth spirits and thank them for their generosity in allowing us to be here in this place. And when we say earth, earth doesn't only mean material earth, like we think like soil. It means all embodiedness. There's another way to understand about earth. Some things are embodied in a spiritual plane. Some things are embodied in a material plane, an emotional plane, like I was talking about earlier. But many things are embodied in such a way that they span different planes. So when we talk about earth spirits, each of those realms has its own quality of earth, you could say. But we tend to focus on the soil and the plants and the wind and the rain and the sky.
What is that black diamond on the top?
Earth.
Oh, that's right.
That's one. The first two both are a way of writing earth. Yeah, those two together. Yeah, and I didn't read close enough I have some dictionaries. I quite like these old characters because they're kind of more, what would be the word, primordial sort of feeling, the way the characters are. So I have some dictionaries where I can, it's not always in the dictionary, but I can find these characters and then read about the roots of where they suppose they may have come from, what were people seeing. Because it's pictograms, it has to do with a visionary quality of people saw a certain shape and it reminded them of something, sometimes very literally and sometimes a little more on a feeling level. And you can trace those back. So it's quite pleasurable. It's different than a phonetic-based writing system in which you have to trace the sounds back, which is also beautiful. You can find out beautiful things there. Hi.
Why are you blowing the conch shell in the morning?
Oh, you noticed. So when I was in, this kind of connects with the question about the earth spirits. As I spoke of a couple times, I had the good fortune to travel to Peru in August for the 120th anniversary of our School of Buddhism, Soto Zen, in South America. And before those celebrations, I had a chance to travel around Peru with one of our members of our temple. Many of you know Arlie, or Enyu is her Dharma name. She spent some time here. She's Peruvian. And so she took us around many places. And her really deep work is a remembering of the ancestral practices, ancestral ways of... it's really fun to talk with her about it because she's very insistent. She says it's not just our people, like Andean people. She says, yeah, I am involved in the remembering of Andean ancestral practices, but those aren't Andean practices. They're transhuman practices. She's like, this is like fundamental stuff. And she doesn't even talk about it in the way this is why I can follow along. People may know the term perennial philosophy. There's a certain strand of thinking. People like Houston Smith, who I super admire. I was able to meet him once, actually, who say, all religion really is one, and there's this underlying thing which is true through all religions. That kind of drives me nuts a little bit, because it's like too explanatory. It's too kind of like, I'm going to sit back and smoke my pipe and say like, see, they're all the same thing, rather than if they're all the same thing, then you're in the thick of it, right? Now there's no room for kind of the like sitting back and kind of talking about it, which I don't think Houston Smith was doing. But anyway, she doesn't talk about it that way. She doesn't even talk about that primordial way as being like this strand that's underneath everything. She talks about it as just being the fact of living. And I really appreciated that. And so I wanted to go and meet the people that she works with and those kind of things. And one of in many of the ceremonies that we went, or all the ceremonies that we went to, this conch or conch, people say it both ways. It's a shell, like a trumpet, a shell-less trumpet, was blown. That was really integral to the practice. And so while I was there, I was really moved by all of the practices, and it was a really deep experience for me, and I was learning a lot. And because I'm a Soto Zen priest, I asked myself this question: what's something that I could do every day? Because that's kind of how we are, right? It's like, what's a practice that I could do that would allow me to keep unfolding this? I have lots of ideas, and I've written lots in my journal, and I've heard a lot from people and everything. But the way that I know how to work with something is to take up a practice and do it over and over and over and over again, and let it lead through the woods, so to speak. So I was thinking about that. I was like, well, what would be a practice? And I thought, I should blow conch. So she called her one of her friends and teachers, who's a shaman in Cusco and leads many of the rituals there. And she's kind of a big conch person, and kind of a conch master. And so she obtained one for me, and when we went to Cusco, then we met her. And then there's a special ceremony when you receive one. And so it's kind of becomes your heart. And then very interesting things, like if you hand it to someone else, you should be the only one that blows it. But if you hand it to someone else, you should always kiss it and then hand it to someone else. Like she gave me a bunch of rules. And then she said, so at your temple, you're the teacher? You're the shaman? And I said, yeah. And she said, okay, so you should blow it every day. And then I didn't know, I was going to take it up as a practice, but I didn't know what that would look like. And she said, it's best actually to blow it when the sun comes up and when the sun goes down, and then in between you could blow it. And she started listening. I don't think I'm going to blow it that long. But then I started to blow it each morning, and to learn, first you just have to be able to blow it. I'm starting to be able to do that a little bit. It takes a couple years, is what most people said, to really get the real feel for it. And then what she was teaching me, and then another woman who was a conch player was talking with me about, they said you really have to blow it from your heart. Like you're learning how to get your, the equipment kind of situated right. But I said, really, you have to blow it from your heart. And so it feels like a study of that. And this is maybe a little esoteric, but I'll just throw it out there for whatever it's worth. A conch shell has one central point, which is where you blow. It's not actually a point, it's an aperture. And that aperture is the vehicle for a vibration which becomes the whole world through the spiral of this gift from the sea. And so I can see that there's something about that which is, of course, the shell is a physical embodiment of a space which is completely alive. And the total aliveness of the space can only be encountered through our willingness to engage the body on every level, material and otherwise. So that's what I'm thinking about when I'm blowing conch. Not in such a complicated way, but more just from the heart. But for me, that's what it means from the heart, I suppose.
Doesn't it show up in Buddhist teachings?
So the conch is used in Buddhism. You see it in Tibetan lineages a lot. Usually before a ceremony, they will be blowing the conch. It's very common, and it's one of the offerings. So in Soto Zen, we tend to talk about 5 offerings, and the offerings are light, flowers, food, drink, and incense. So we usually talk about those. In some other schools, they have other configurations, and oftentimes one that is included is music. And so for music, drums and horns, conch horns, are oftentimes what becomes the music, sound, offerings of sound. And in Japan, it gets used a little bit less often in Buddhism, but sometimes it's more used by the shamanic practitioners, some of which are Buddhist related. They have kind of mountain ascetics who are a combination of indigenous shamanic practices and Buddhism, and they oftentimes carry a conch. And it's a little bit different one. It's like it's this kind of long one like that, and then it kind of comes more to a point. It usually has a metal aperture on the end. It comes out. So.
Lately I've been dealing with what I call anxiety dreams. But they're so vivid. Some of them relate to regrets that I have. Some of them relate to situations that I had no control over.
Yeah.
But they're so real that sometimes I wake up, feeling the anxiety. So could you shed some wisdom on how I'm supposed to deal with this, or what I'm supposed to be learning from this?
Yeah. Well, I think what I can give you not so much is what you're supposed to be learning from it, but more something that you can do to work with that and see what they teach you. And this is very, very old practice to invite the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas into your dream world. So when you're going to bed, everyone has your ritual, whatever it is. For me, it's brushing my teeth. I always take a shower at night, blah, 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 and then you get into bed. But like even once you get into bed, I have to lay on my back for a while. And then I turn on my side and I fall asleep. So that's what I do. You will have whatever you do. But when I'm on my back, when I'm doing this practice, I put my hands on my belly, and then I recall Buddha or Bodhisattvas that are particularly resonant for me. And I see them. Like I look at them in my head. That's not, it's like not a complicated thing. You just recall them. And so I recall them and I invite them to come into the dream, and I let my breathing be present, and don't try to force it, but just a kind of relaxed presence with the breath. And then if I wake up, during the night and something's ajar, then I would just offer to them. Either right there, with my eyes closed, like making an offering to them of incense or something, or I get up, I go to my altar, and I would light incense and stay there for a little bit. And when I do that, it's not because I want them to keep me from having difficulty in my dream, but it's because I want them to teach me something about it. I want them to guide me. And I find that then oftentimes there's a meaning that comes out of the dream that I couldn't see before. You can't. It's not like you're not digging it up. It's more like really just asking for that revealing. You come back to that again and again, and you may find something